Good evening and welcome to our webinar on the Renters' Rights Bill. Thank you for taking some time out to join myself and Katie as we talk you through some of the key changes to legislation affecting landlords and those interested in residential property, particularly in West Oxfordshire. So without further ado, this is what we're going to look at covering tonight. I'm going to do a very brief insight into what's happening in our local property market. But the meat of what we're talking about tonight is the Renters' Rights Bill. And we're going to go, what's happening with it? What are the those of you who are familiar with the old Rent Reform Bill, we'll talk through the key changes. If you weren't familiar with that, don't worry, because we're going to cover what really matters with the Renters' Rights Bill. What do we know? When's it going to happen? What does it mean for you as landlords? And with Katie's expertise on the property management side, we'll look into what you need to do about that. And there are a couple of other key aspects of legislation that you really do need to be aware of as well. We will try and avoid acronyms. If I've written them on the slide, it's because not because I was lazy. It's because for expediency, but MEES are the minimum energy efficiency standards. AWAB is not an acronym. It's the name of a poor young child who died as a result of things that were not done properly in a property in which he was living. And then we'll finish up with an outlook into the local property market for 2025. I'll dust off my crystal ball and see what we can come up with. But without further ado, what's happening in our property market? I know it says summer. That's because I'm looking at the 3 months up to September of what was transacting here in West Oxfordshire. And it was a market in that period which was really driven by that first cut in interest rates. But predominantly the market was fairly stable. It's been busier. Certainly transaction volumes are up 24% in England compared to September 2023 when interest rates were at their peak. So we're seeing a larger number of transactions, predominantly around the sort of £300,000, £300,000 to £400,000 mark, and in the 3-bed territory. But we're here to talk about lettings. So what's going on with our lettings market? The turquoise, right? The turquoise line shows the southeast. The black line is the UK average. And do note where the baseline is. So although it is dipping at the moment, that just shows that the rate of growth in rents is slowing. Rental growth in the southeast for the 12 months up to the end of September was up 5.3%, but it was growing in excess of 9% early this year. So rental growth has been exceptionally strong, and we predict that it will continue to remain buoyant, but I'll finish on that and not steal my own sandwiches for later on. So minimum energy efficiency standards and energy performance certificates, or EPCs. These, having been the flavour of the month, were then kicked into the long grass by the Conservative government and have now been resurrected by the new Labour government. And they are saying that we'll be back on track to look at a minimum of a grade C for all privately rented properties in 2030. And by 2030, we probably mean April 2030. But I'm going to be clear. In fact, caveat I should mention about all of this. This is live, folks. Stuff is happening very, very quickly in this space. Things are moving swiftly, and it's our job to keep you as up to date as we possibly can. And we will absolutely do that. So I'm talking about what we know, what we think, and I'll try and be clear when differentiating between the two. But we think that the new regulations are likely to come in, and that has certainly been very strongly signalled, and probably around April 2030. The stuff in yellow is deliberately in yellow, and that is because it's based on what was previously being spoken about. We haven't seen that level of detail yet in the current round. But essentially what we're saying here is, if you're a landlord, and I've been saying this to all investors for over 5 years now, I haven't changed my record. I make no apology for that. If you're an investor buying an investment property now, then make sure it's either a C or above, or that achieving a C is very easily done without too much financial expenditure. And that's been no change. If you'd asked me for any point over the last 5 years or so, that's exactly what I've been saying to you for new purchases. Now, there will almost certainly be a change to the cap. At the moment, you can spend £3,500 and still fail to achieve a grade C and apply for an exemption. It is likely that that minimum spend will be increased, but also there will be a recognition almost certainly that not every property can make a grade C. Not every property should be able to make a grade C. If it's a listed building, you can't suddenly go and clad it to make it, you know, more energy efficient and destroy the entire character of the village, for example. So there will be exemptions. There will almost certainly be grants, so they can take a carrot and stick approach. But, and this is crucial when we look at the other things that are being done in the property space at the moment, I think there'll be more of a move towards enforcement. It's fair to say that enforcement in West Oxfordshire hasn't perhaps been at the pointy end, if you catch my drift. I reckon I have probably registered more exemptions than any other person in West Oxfordshire, largely because I've done a fair few. And when you look at the database, there aren't many on it, which leads me to believe there are lots of properties out there that haven't been entered on the exemption database. And largely people have gotten away with that up to this point. I think that will change. And we're going to talk more about enforcement in the rounds of the Renters' Rights Bill as we come on. But what we're saying here really is grade C looks like it's going to make a comeback probably in 2030. Although we might have another government by then, so who knows? But I think, you know, this is firmly back on the agenda. And I'll say nothing more on that other than this report by Rightmove was released just on Friday last week. I put a link below, and if you want to download that, it's a really interesting overview in greener properties and what the status of UK property is and how many are below a grade C in rental and all the rest of it. So, and I'm delighted to say I was asked to comment on that in Rightmove, and I'm in there, but that's not the reason I'm asking you to download it. There's a free download there for you, and if you want to pick up on that and have a read through at your leisure, then please just click below to download that. So, moving swiftly on to the real reason we're here, the Renters' Rights Bill. I put Mark 2 because I said it really is a pretty strong iteration. It's a bit of a complete rewrite of the Renters' Reform Bill. But I think as landlords, this is crucial. For you guys, it's a three-step process. And this is nice and straightforward. Step one is to acknowledge that this is coming, and well done. Everyone that watched this webinar has clearly already acknowledged this is coming because you're here and you're invested in learning about it and what it means for you as landlords. Step two, well done. You're also going to be able to tick that off tonight because you need to understand what this means for you. It's our job, for Katie and I, to do our best to educate you on that. And of course, this is a moving feast, and we'll continue to drip feed you information as and when we get it for things that are important for you as landlords to know and understand. And lastly, of course, take action, because what's the point if you're not going to do anything? And we'll come on to those actions at the end. But this is a three-step process. You're already at step one. You'll be at step two by the end of tonight, and you'll know what you need to do for step three once we've finished today. So, you know, good work already. So I've mentioned a little bit of the background. I think it's really worth mentioning that this administration achieved in 8 weeks what the previous one didn't in over 8 years. They are moving with pace. This is happening, and there is no reason why it won't happen, and there is no sense of it being kicked into the long grass. You know, this is really is going to happen very swiftly, and we'll come on to the timeframes in a moment. But first, I appreciate there's quite a lot in here. We do have a nice, easy, one-sided, you please see, there's nothing on the back, ready reckoner of how this works. So again, I'll just put a little thing on the bottom of the screen now for you to download our 6 things that landlords need to know for the Renters' Rights Bill. So if you want to just download that, then you've got it for, you know, to have a read through in the future. But timeframes, well, you've had an interesting day today, Katie. I mean, you've been watching BBC, Parliament TV, or whatever. Tell us what happened today.
So the whole property management team have got their finger on the pulse, and we were listening to the second reading. So pleased to say looks like there's no change from the first reading. So our slides have stayed how they were last night. But it's good just to hear it all. And as you say, it is moving with pace. It's coming.
This is live. When we booked the date for this, we had no idea that the second reading of the Renters' Rights Bill would be this afternoon. Clearly, that would be insane to book a webinar, 2 hours after that. And yet we're here. Pleased to say that I think we're bang up to date as of this afternoon. But essentially, in terms of timeframes, so we've had the first reading on the 11th of September. Second reading was today. They'll then go into the consultation phase, the House of Commons. They'll then get kicked upstairs to the Lords, where they'll do their bit. But really, what will then, once they're in agreement of how this law is going to look, they'll look for royal assent, probably in spring, at which point, probably 6 months after that, it will become law. So best guess at the moment, sort of September, October of next year. So 12 months' time of when this physically comes in, but it would have been made law prior to that. That's our best guess for timings at the moment, and that's certainly what the parliamentary timetable is looking like. So these are the key aspects of the Renters' Rights Bill to reform tenancies. And effectively, assured short-hold tenancies is what we're used to, what we've had for a number of years now, going in the bin. And what we're going to end up with instead are periodic assured tenancies with no end date. And the other key point to that is that tenants will be able to give 2 months' notice to end a tenancy. And the other point about rental reform is that the grounds for possession, the Section 8 grounds, I'm going to go into the legalese bit later on, but there will be expanded grounds for possession. So that's what we mean by reforming tenancies. When we're talking about strengthening tenants' rights, my second point, so rent increases are going to be limited to no more than once per year. That's kind of no change from where we are at the moment. You can't do it more than once, or if you do, you're going to find yourself on the naughty step. But the means for doing, a mechanism for doing that will be that you have to use a Section 13 notice. You can do that at the moment, and we sometimes do when we're negotiating rent increases, but that will be the only means to negotiate a tenancy increase going forward, is to issue a Section 13 notice with 2 months' notice. And tenants will be able to challenge this at no cost through the first tier tribunal. Again, no change to where we are currently with that. The only slight tweak is that currently, if a tenant challenges a rent increase with a first tier tribunal, the first tier tribunal can actually say, well, what the landlord's asked for is not only reasonable, but it's below market rent, and can set a rent higher than what the landlord has asked for. That was, if you like, the only downside to a tenant going to first tier tribunal. That is being removed. So the first tier tribunal will no longer be able to award a rent increase that is higher than what the landlord has asked for. Probably fair enough. I can't imagine it was ever really put to test that often anyway. What is more important, and actually I think to be fair to them, this is a really neat way to manage this bit of change in legislation. Ending rental bidding. Okay, I get that it's something that Generation Rent and Shelter are dead against. But effectively, when you publish an asking rent, which is a clever way of just saying when you stick it on Rightmove with a rent, landlords, agents, whoever will be prohibited from inviting, encouraging, or even accepting an offer above this. So when you set that rent, you will not be able to have a higher rent than that, whatever happens, however many applicants you get. So it's really important to get some expert advice on what that rent should be, because you cannot subsequently go back and go, oh, I've had loads of interest, you know what, I think I'll put it up a bit. No, that will be outlawed. It'll also give the tenants the rights to request a pet, and Katie's going to talk about that in a bit. And anti-discrimination is talking about not being able to discriminate against tenants who are in receipt of benefits. You can't already anyway, or those who have children, just strengthening that up a bit. So, not too much difference from where we are in the current regime anyway. Landlord redress scheme, there'll be a new ombudsman. I'm not going to steal Katie's sandwiches on that. And a creation of a private rental sector database. Again, Katie's going to talk about that in a bit. And then a legal standard for property conditions. So this is the decent home standard, which has been spoken about for a while. We already have the Housing Health and Safety Rating System and the Fitness for Human Habitation Act. This just takes it one step further for the private rental sector and incorporates AWAB's law. And Katie's going to take that into some detail. And then expanded enforcement powers. So rent repayment orders and strengthening local authorities' enforcement powers and expanding the financial penalties, all of which sounds very severe, but actually for decent properties that are well managed, it is not something to be scared or worried about. And timeframes I've already mentioned. So, as I mentioned, RIP, rest in peace, the Section 21 notice. The key change around Section 21 notices, which is different from what was being proposed under the Renters Reform Bill, is that when this becomes law in September, October, best guess, of next year, there will be no bedding in period, no grandfather rights. So if you've got a pre-existing assured short hold tenancy that is for a fixed term and that goes beyond that date, it doesn't matter. It will be illegal to enforce those terms. So let's arbitrarily say 1st of October. I've got no idea if that is the date. Nobody does yet. But from whatever date is set, let's say it's the 1st of October, all tenancies, whether they're new or pre-existing, will effectively become assured periodic tenancies that are open-ended. And there won't be any sort of grandfather rights for pre-existing assured short-hold tenancies. That is a significant change, but will make it easier because everyone knows where they stand, and there won't be different levels of playing fields for different tenancies that started at different times, and all the sorts of things that have been proposed under the previous sets of legislation. And the other key bit around civil penalties are the amounts. We're now sort of starting with an initial fine of £8,000, rising to £30,000 for those that are on a really naughty step. So yeah, they're really quite serious about this. Possession is going to be through good old Section 8. Courts are going to be backed up. It's not linked to court reform as per the Renters Reform Bill. So the courts are going to be expected to suck this up and deliver justice with their current resources. And that is going to be very difficult. And so all those things before that were saying, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to fix the courts first. No, the courts are now, as they are today, is pretty much how they will be when this comes into effect, and that's key. And at the moment, when you apply for possession of a property, if you serve a Section 21 notice and the tenant doesn't leave, or you don't use a Section 21 notice, use a Section 8 notice, a landlord has a number of grounds that they can apply for, and some are discretionary and some are mandatory. And it does exactly what it says on the tin. If it's mandatory, the judge can't show any discretion. They can't say, oh, would you know what? I think it's a bit harsh to kick you out of your home. If it's mandatory, you're out. If it's discretionary, the judge can say, well, yes or no. Both sets are being expanded, and there will be some special categories, students and whatever. We're not going to go into that today. But the other key change here is that previously where there were 2 months notice, that is going to be changed to 4 months notice. There will be mechanisms for gaining possession because you want to move back in or sell a property. But crucially, again, to get around the problem of a landlord saying, I'm going to sell it, but then not really sell it, there's going to be a 12-month bar on when you evict a tenant using a Section 8 notice. If you then say, oh, I've had a change of heart, I don't want to sell it anymore, you have to wait 12 months before you can do that. So you really are going to have to sell or move into it and sell a different one or rent a different one or whatever. So that is a significant change. Some new stuff around antisocial behaviour. The bar is being set slightly higher than it was or appeared to be under the Renters Reform Bill. And arrears is changing. Actually, it's being made less complex. Those of you that do remember all the complicated bits about 3 times for 3 months, within 3 years or whatever, all that nonsense has gone. And actually, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty much as it is at the moment, but made more difficult. As in, at the moment, if you've got 2 months arrears, you can give them 14 days notice with the Section 8 notice. That is changing, and it's now going to be 3 months arrears at the time you serve notice and go to court, which is as it was. But crucially, it's not 14 days notice anymore, it's 4 weeks notice. So that's being doubled from 14 to 28 days for obtaining possession for non-payment of rent. So with all this legal stuff going on, Katie, do you have an answer as to what landlords can do about it?
Thanks, thankfully, we do have a solution. So if you were on our last webinar, you would have heard me talk about our rent and legal protection policy. So any of our Parker staff that have got investment properties, they all have this policy in place and pay for it. So I think that's hugely telling about what we know that's happening in the industry and the cover that we are providing. So the cost of this, you might ask, £36 a month, so just over £1 a day, less than your daily coffee. It's a tax deductible cost, which is really good for you as a landlord. It covers 100% of your rent. So as soon as your tenants fall into arrears, you can start putting in your claim with this policy. You've got the rent recovery included, you've got legal expenses. As Brendan highlighted, there's not going to be a court upgrade. So it's going to be a very lengthy, costly process to go through the court to regain possession, and all of your legal expenses would be covered under this policy. And you've also got property damage covered. So when you finally do get possession of the property, if you find that there is some upgrades that need to be done, carpets need to be replaced, decoration needs to happen, you will receive rent for that period of time, up to 2 months, whilst you're getting that property back to market condition and then finding your new tenant. So we will have, we've got sheets on this, information sheets. I'm really knowledgeable on it. It's a product that we actually used at the beginning of the year, the only time that Joy and I have been to court together for Parkers. Our landlord had a Mr. and Mrs. tenant. Unfortunately, they split, Mrs. vacated, and Mr. found himself unable to vacate. So Joy and I did all of the paperwork process for this, which was quite simple and easy on behalf of our landlord, and we popped along to court and we got possession of that property. The landlord got all of his rent arrears for that. He got all of his legal covers, legal expenses covered, and he also got 6 weeks of the rent for the 6 weeks that we did the property up. So it is a product we really believe in. If you want any more information, drop us an email, give me a call. We've got various bits and pieces we can send out to you and help you get that in place.
Thank you. And quid a day, I mean, that's a bargain. But I guess, it probably doesn't take the brains of a rocket scientist to work out that this is today's price. And I guess that, when we're looking at extending the arrears period from 2 months to 3 months, and the fact that everything is going to have to go through court, and that the courts are going to potentially be backed up and therefore incur greater legal costs or longer delays in doing that, I suspect that the cost of these is going to go up. But we don't know that. This is where we're at the moment. But I think plan ahead. You're paying for insurance, and if the cost of delivering that insurance is going to get more expensive, they're going to charge more for it. But that's where we are as at today, and it's a really good policy. And you don't have to do the paperwork because we do it for you. Right, what on earth is a rent repayment order, and how does that apply?
Well, exactly that. So a rent repayment order is a tenant-led enforcement tool where the tenants can use it to claim compensation back from the landlord for anything that the landlord's done wrong. So the most likely rent repayment orders will be for gaining a property, so serving notice on a tenant for possession and then not committing to that possession ground. So like Brendan said earlier, if you are looking to sell the property and you serve notice on your tenant and then you decide not to sell that property and you possibly relet or do something that you shouldn't do, your tenant will be able to go to the first tier tribunal and put a rent repayment order in place. And what's changed from the Renters Reform Bill to the Renters' Rights Bill is it was previously a maximum of 12 months rental, which, let's be honest, is a huge amount of rental anyway, but that has now doubled to 24 months rental as the repayment scheme, with the extension of the claim period also doubling. So your tenant can claim for up to 24 months after this incident has happened. So this is a tenant whistleblowing system. So basically commit to the rules, keep law abiding, and then this won't happen. One thing to really highlight on here is that landlords that they have tenants in the property that are in receipt of housing benefit or universal credit, the local authority will be in a position to also request a rent repayment order, and they are going to have the manpower and the knowledge to do so. So the big message here is abide by the rules and nothing will go wrong. Otherwise, these are huge penalties that you could be paying out directly to your tenant.
And I think that's important to note. Whilst not new, this is something that is being extended and being given real teeth now, that they're going to have to report, the local authorities are going to have to report back to central government about how well they're doing in enforcement. So it can't be that they turn a blind eye to it or deaf ear. They're really going to have to get out there and enforce. And at the moment, realistically, every now and then we read in our industry press about a landlord that has been fined because they didn't register the deposit correctly, and so that's they'll get fined 3 times the deposit or whatever. This is an extension of that, but it's been doubled in terms of the severity of the penalties, and that could really hurt. Anyway, on to a lighter note, pets.
Yes, so pets in lets. Everybody's been talking about this for some time. We covered it last time. You're not going to be able to unreasonably withhold consent to a prospective tenant that wishes to take your property and they do have a pet. Tenants will be able to challenge unfair decisions, again, through the first tier tribunal and on the property database that we'll come back to later on. So as a landlord, you will have a strict 42-day time limit to either give that consent or refuse it. Now, there are going to be caveats to that. So where you are underneath a head lease, you've got a property in a block of flats, you do have to abide by the head lease rules. If the head lease states no pets, then that is your stance, no pets allowed. So if you do have a flat or you are part of a head lease, we are saying get ready, get prepared, get your head lease and have a good read of it. Can you or can you not accept pets when this becomes law? If you are able to accept pets, say you've got a freehold 1-bedroom house on cogs and your tenant asks to have a dog, you can reasonably ask for more information. So the type of questions that we would be thinking about asking is what age is the dog, what breed is the dog, do they have a dog walker, a dog sitter, trying to find out quite how long the dog spends at home. And when we're asking those questions, we're working out the suitability of the pet to the property, and it will be the landlord and agent's discretion to decide whether that property is suitable for that pet. So if I had that 1-bedroom house and I had a tenant say, I've got 5 Alsatians, the likelihood is that property isn't suitable. But if I had a farm in the Cotswolds with 5 acres, absolutely probably is suitable. So there will be some movement on that and discretion will need to be used. It's not all doom and gloom. So you will be able to put an insurance policy in place. So pet insurance. Our stance on it is that we would be asking landlords to put this in place themselves so that you've got the rights over that policy. It's not been accidentally cancelled or the monthly payments not being made. You're paying it for the 12 months upfront and you've got control of that. And there will be an amendment to the Tenant Fees Act 2019 to allow you as a landlord to ask for that reasonable cost back from the tenant. And as it stands at the moment, there'll be no specific power to evict for non-compliance. You will be able to go back and ask for the insurance to be put in place, but no specific.
Yeah, that would be effectively if someone moved in a pet without permission, there'd be a breach of tenancy. That's a discretionary ground, going back to our mandatory and discretionary ones.
And this takes you back to property management. So if you're a self-managing landlord looking after your own tenant, this is when the management visits become really important. So only last week, I went out to a property in Brize Norton. They've got permission to have 4 gun dogs. They've got them outside in the kennels, absolutely fine. I turned up and we had over triple the amount of dogs that we should have had. They are moving and they're moving for the purpose of the dogs. So we were aware there was a slight change, but had I not made that management visit, I wouldn't have known. So as a self-managing landlord, it really is the emphasis is on doing these regular management visits and ensuring you know what's going on in your investment property.
Absolutely. Thank you. Right. Which sort of now leads on to AWAB's law.
Yes, so AWAB's law follows the tragic and avoidable death of 2-year-old AWAB due to the prolonged exposure to mould. So I think the really key words there are avoidable death and prolonged exposure. So as a landlord, this law is coming in to make sure that the government sets clear expectations and timeframes for landlords so that you must take action to make these homes safe. This is the biggest part that they spent today talking about on the second reading, was that tenants must feel safe in their own home and they must be able to raise maintenance with landlords. So the tenants will be able to bring enforcement action on the landlords. And again, they'll be able to go to the first tier tribunal if they don't believe they're being dealt with fairly. Now, we know that mould is 90% of the time is a tenant lifestyle, but you're not going to be in a position that you can just say to a tenant, it's your lifestyle. With this new legislation, you're going to need to work with your tenant. So it's less about the tenant and the landlord being against each other, but working together to find out the root cause of the mould that you have in the property. If it is tenant lifestyle, they might need educating on opening the windows and ventilating the property in the mornings, and that although you've got the windows open, you do still need to heat the property. And I promise you, all that heat is not going straight out of that window, but that's really important to have that air circulating. Not a lot of tenants know that they shouldn't put the furniture right against the walls, and that you will get mould behind the walls if you've got your furniture pushed up too close. So it really is going to be down to landlords to try and resolve this. Now, Parkers were ahead of the game here, as I think I'm right in saying we were the only agency last year to carry out mould management visits, and they were specifically tailored to look around the property and ensure that we didn't have any mould, and if we did, that we helped the tenants understand why they have that mould and how to treat it. We also carried out some minor maintenance in a couple of the properties. So we do advise putting humidity controlled extractor fans in the properties. These are fitted in such a way that the tenants can't turn them off. And as soon as the humid levels get to a certain level, this extractor fan will kick in and they will clear the humidity of that property. And we've had really good action on this, and it's had a lot of change to a lot of properties that did have that problem. We are going to be offering those mould visits again. And as a self-managing landlord, you will probably be glad to hear that we will be offering this as a service to you guys as well, because we're hugely knowledgeable about this. We've spent the last year reading up what we don't know about mould and damp. There isn't something to know. So that will be a service that we will be providing for any landlords that would like that to be added on. And Brendan's going to click a magic button and we will have a registration for a survival guide that you can click on, register for that. We're working really hard on it at the moment. And then as soon as it's available, that will be emailed out to you to help you with any issues you may have.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is something we do know quite a lot of detail about, which is why we're putting together a separate guide, because this is an extension of a piece of legislation that is already in place for the social housing sector, and it's being extended into the private rental sector. So we know what the timeframes are, we know what the expectation of landlord actions are, and so we can share all that with you. So we're just topping and tailing that at the moment, but if you click down below, and as soon as that's ready, we'll send you a free copy of that, which will hopefully be useful and give you everything you need to know in case you want to continue managing that yourselves. Landlord redress scheme.
Yes, so the Landlord Redress Scheme is a private rented sector ombudsman service, which all landlords will be required to join. Now, of course, there will be penalties if you don't join that, which I'll come on to in a moment. But this is really good because it's going to provide quick, fair and impartial resolution to tenants' complaints about properties and possibly rogue landlords, which hopefully none of you are, so there is nothing to worry about. But it's going to make those tenants really feel that they've got a voice, and hopefully it will extend the amount of time that they're staying in properties, because they'll feel they've got a voice, they'll feel they're getting a resolution and any issues are being fixed. So this scheme will also They'll have the ability to ask landlords to issue apologies where they have done wrong, but also it will make them take remedial action. So if it's found that you do need to take remedial action, you will be forced as a landlord to take that, which you should be anyway, as I said, if you're not a rogue landlord, and you may be issued to pay compensation to the tenant, which again will come in the likely form of the rent repayment order. So this is really serious, and it can be costly, but as long as you're keeping to what you need to do, there is nothing to worry about. The civil penalties that I mentioned on this, so for the initial breach, they're talking about the penalty being around £7,000. For repeat offenders, it is going to be upwards of £40,000, but also include criminal prosecution. So repeat offenders, repeat offenders have got no chance. Don't do it. And if you do it by accident, definitely learn from it, because it's going to be costly, but it's going to be really useful for both tenants and landlords.
I think, this is just a levelling up, because at the moment, of course, as agents, we've had to be members of redress schemes for years now. But if you're a self-managing landlord, and it's not going well and the tenant wants to make a complaint, kind of who do they go to? There is nobody. So this is just a levelling up of that playing field. But remind me, Katie, this isn't just for tenants in situ, is it? This extends to applicants and afterwards as well?
Yeah. So if a tenant feels, or an applicant rather, feels that they were dealt with unfairly, so they may have asked to take the property and you've said no because of a certain pet, just because you felt like it, no real reasoning behind that, they'll be able to go to this landlord redress scheme and say, this landlord is not behaving within the new law.
Brilliant. And of course on the hook for, I think, up to 2 years afterwards as well. If there's been a tenancy and someone then comes out the woodwork and says, oh, actually, I forgot to say there's a problem here. So, you're not off the hook on the day they move out either, unfortunately. And the property portal, which is not the same thing, I gather.
No, not the same thing. So this is a one-stop for all property related information. So landlords will be required to register, and then they'll be required to register each individual property they have. So in layman terms, if you were a tenant and you were looking at this 1-bedroom house on Cogs Development and you typed in the address, you'd be able to find all the information on there with regards to the property. So all of your compliance, your gas safety, electrical safety, EPC, everything like that. And there is talk about, if there has been a landlord complaint, possibly through the redress scheme, that information may well be on there. So if there are rogue landlords around, as a tenant, you will be able to find this information out. Now, I think this is brilliant for landlords, because it will really help you understand what compliance you do need, because you'll need to add it on there, and it will clearly show you what you're missing, and you shouldn't market the property before all of the information is complete on this portal. So if you are missing an electrical safety and it hasn't crossed your mind, the portal is going to remind you, you can't mark it yet until you put your electrical safety on here. So that's a really positive thing for landlords. It's providing better information to tenants so that they can make a really informed decision. We know the more informed a tenant is, the better the decision they can make, and then the longer they are likely to stay at the property, regardless of the fact that they can give 2 months notice. That's going to be by the by. As long as they're happy and the property is of a good standard, then they'll be staying there for a long time, and they'll be able to make these informed decisions at the very beginning. Now, again, you'll be subject to penalties should you not register onto the portal or mark it without filling out all of the details on the portal. They will be the same fines as the redress scheme. So £7,000 for your first offence, and then repeat offenders £40,000. But interestingly, the councils will be able to use this portal to distinguish any rogue landlords, and they will be able to find them. So it will be a slight money-making scheme for the councils. They're going to have the manpower to do this and the knowledge to do it, and it is a slight whistleblowing technique for a tenant. So the message here is just make sure you're compliant and you will have nothing to worry about.
All clear. Thank you very much. So I'm going to try and sum up now, and then we'll just see if we've got any quick questions we can answer for you as well. But I understand that this is causing concern. But really, in big handfuls, it's not that much of a huge of a change. Yes, Section 21 is going, but there's going to be strengthened Section 8. Yes, you're going to have a database, but it's going to put all the information in one place. Yes, you can have a redress scheme. There's already one if you're an agent. Actually, it's just a strengthening of those key elements, and there's not too much in here to be concerned about if you've got a well-maintained property that is well managed. I think what is a significant change is that there's going to be a lot more skill involved in negotiating with tenants where there are problems. If you've got mold issues or you're starting to see arrears problems because of the extended periods now, or because of the mandated timeframes in which you have to react to certain things, then really it's just another large piece of legislation to be on top of. But actually, none of it is overly taxing unless you start to fall foul of the regulations. So I said this was a 3-step plan, and you're already learning all about it, and we'll continue to keep you informed. But what can you do as landlords now in preparation for this bill, which is, as I say, probably coming sort of very tail end of summer, autumn next year, realistically? Keep up to date with what's going on. We will help you with that. We'll keep you up to date with key changes, and we'll feed you information as we turn it into sort of nice, easily digestible chunks. Energy efficiency standards, those minimum standards, we'll keep you abreast of those changes, and we'll flag anything if you need to take action as early as we can, because we all know that A, it can be costly, and B, if they do suddenly throw a spanner in the works, then actually anybody that does this type of work is going to be inundated with landlords wanting it done ahead of the deadlines. And of course, Section 21s are still extant at the moment. We are aware already of some landlords issuing these to make sure that they've got the right tenant going forward once you've got an open-ended periodic tenancy, which makes it more difficult for us at the moment finding the right tenant for properties, because there are tenants out there who might not be the right tenant for the right property. And so we're taking extra steps and checks to ensure that we do match the right tenant to the right property to prevent problems going forward. But make sure before this comes in that you've got the right tenants in your properties and that you're charging the right rents, because as the first tier tribunals get involved with Section 13 notices and rent increases, you need to get that off on the right foot from the very outset and be charging the correct rent for this. So a quick look ahead, a dust off of my crystal ball. Now that those of you who are still awake and been with, in fact, before I do that, a quick favour from us really. Having sort of sat through what we had to say and update you about the Renters' Rights Bill, would you please spend 10 seconds just answering the poll below for me? Don't worry, it doesn't attribute who said what or whatever, you just tick a button. But I'm just intrigued to see what your thoughts are as a cohort. We had 128 landlords registered for this webinar. Some of them will be watching it on catch up, but be really interested to know what people's thoughts are or what their view of the future is, having now had a bit of an overview on the Renters' Rights Bill. So thank you for those of you that are busy ticking away at that. I do appreciate it. But crystal ball time. Budget notwithstanding. So I think landlords probably, unless you happen to be a tax advisor or an accountant, are probably the next cohort of people who are on tenterhooks awaiting this budget, because it's not the world's most exciting subject, but there's been all sorts of talk around, capital gains and whatever else. And so, the 30th of this month, when the budget is unveiled, will be a telling time potentially for landlords. So, that is just tempering the market slightly at the moment, particularly from an investment perspective. I think if you're an owner occupier, it's not going to change whether you move or not, quite frankly, and so not necessarily that important. Rents are going to continue to climb, partly as some landlords exit the sector, partly as some put up the rents to cover the increased costs of compliance, and there is a shortage. Every property that we put on the rental market at the moment, receives interest of 20-30 applicants, and we have to whittle that down and do our very best to find the very best possible tenant. And I put below there the outlook, the consensus forecast for both capital growth of properties and rental growth over the next few years. Tellingly, 2024 started with a consensus growth of -3.2, and that has been a swing of 5.2% to 2% positive growth, and the outlook continues to look positive for capital values for residential property, and that is largely because interest rates are going to continue coming down. In fact, just last week, the governor of the Bank of England said they may now fall more quickly. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed for that one. But the consensus forecast for property prices is positive, and I think certainly in West Oxfordshire, where we are a rural area with lots of green space around us, there are not enough properties for people who want to live in the area, and so that is holding prices up both on the rental and the sales side of things. So I hope that has been of interest. Thank you for those of you who stayed with us up to now. I think we had a couple of questions sent in advance. So I want to just quickly go through a couple of those, Katie, and see what we've got. We did
quite a number for you, actually, Brendan, on the slides that you covered.
Okay.
So one is, how will a landlord gain possession in the future?
Right, that can only be through the courts going forward. So when this comes in, it will be through the Section 8 process. Obviously, it depends what it's for. But if it's rent arrears, then that's going to be on the mandatory ground once you hit 3 months rent arrears. If it's because you want to sell the property, I don't know what ground number that is off the top of my head, but there's a ground for that. But again, that will be 4 months notice, as are all the other grounds, bar antisocial behaviour and rent arrears, which are just 4 weeks. So Section 8 notice through the courts is the short answer.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, the one that we hear quite a lot every day is, do you think tenants will move more often now that they can?
It's a really good question. I can see why it's being asked. Luckily, we already sort of know the answer to that one, because actually we are not trailblazers at this. A lot of this has already been rolled out in the devolved nations. So Scotland first, and then more recently Wales. They've got this type of legislation already in place. And actually, it is, categorically not the experience of agents and landlords in Wales and Scotland that tenants are moving house every 4 months. It's a nonsense to suggest that. Tenants have to have it's an awful lot of upheaval. I mean, God, have you tried changing your address and your internet password? No, they don't do it for fun.
Yeah, definitely. And then the last one for you is, should I sell?
I clearly may have a vested interest in this, but no, seriously, I mean, look at the forecast on the screen. I think rents are going up. We need quality properties for people to rent. We've got another question coming in now as well. I'll look at that in a moment. But no, the values will continue to go up, and I think rents will continue to go up, and good quality properties, well managed, will continue to have very strong interest from tenants. Right, we've got 3 more here. How will landlords manage major works, new kitchen, with the tenant being in an open-ended tenancy? That is a really good question. I think
we do it quite a lot at the moment, don't we?
Yeah.
And the way that we manage it as an agency is there will be a period of time that the tenant won't be at the property. They may go away and visit family. They may go abroad on holiday. But at the end of the day, if a really nice thing is happening to the property, so the tenant gains from that lovely kitchen or bathroom, they are going to be committed in helping. They're probably out at work between the hours of 9 and 5. And as long as you can sort out some running water for when they get home, they work around the rest of it. They gain from that really nice new thing that you may have done.
I think also, it depends the reason. If it's just because, want to put a new kitchen there because you want a bit faded and the landlord wants to take advantage of the fact that that's you can write it off against your tax bill, great. But actually, if it's a kitchen, for example, or a bathroom, it might be related to the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, or the Fitness for Human Habitation Act. And so the legislation will support landlords in having to make those changes. So I hope that's answered that one. Is there a fixed time for a new tenant before it becomes periodic? No, it's periodic from the outset, but a tenant won't be able to issue notice within the first 4 months, we understand, and a landlord won't be able to issue notice within the first 12 months if they want to sell it. Deborah's asked, are there any grounds for eviction if a tenant is frequently abusive and lies to the landlord, including, I think there's more to that, but I can't see the including. Sorry, Deborah, if you type more, I can't see that. But ultimately, that will fall under antisocial behaviour, I think. If it's abuse, then that would be antisocial. If it's lying, then that's more likely to be under the discretionary grounds, which means you might not get there. Depends on what the lie relates. If it's about who's living there and you're in breach of the Immigration Act, I could go off on a million different sort of rabbit holes on that one. It depends what those are. But I think if it is in breach of legislation, wider legislation, then yes, that other legislation will have a mechanism. If it's abuse, it'll fall under antisocial behaviour. Anne has asked, will you be able to move into your rental property if you do not have another home?
Yeah.
Short answer is yes. Again, there's grounds for that already. It will require notice. I suspect, but I don't know, I'll check it for you, Anne, that would still fall under the 4-month one. And there might be special grounds around if you're in the forces, because they've got special grounds at the moment. But this real detail is what's going to fall out in the next. We have the first and the second reading. Once we get into the next phase, which will start effectively tomorrow, the committee stage, then they'll start getting into the nitty gritty of the what ifs and the hows of that. So that we don't quite yet know. Hang on, sorry, I got the second part. So, sorry, Deborah's coming. The way it's on our screen is.
I've got some more while you're digesting that, actually. So one of the questions that has come through is regarding the rent and legal policy. So can you add rent and legal out on an existing tenancy? The short answer is yes. You need to be able to prove that the tenant has had 6 months worth of paying the rent on time and in full, and then you're qualified to add that on. So any long-term existing tenancies that you've got, if you can prove that 6 months rent, you can most definitely add that on.
Brilliant. Question from Robert. He's asked, will these changes also apply to furnished rentals? Robert, I'm assuming you're asking about furnished or short-hold tenancies and not short-term. But if you're asking about short-hold tenancies that have furniture in, absolutely. That's irrespective of whether it's furnished, unfurnished, or part furnished. These short tenancies will be no more, and you will be on assured periodic tenancy from day one, even if you've got an agreement written starts ahead of that. That is one of the key changes that I mentioned. On day this legislation coming into force, it will apply equally to all tenancies. Not company debts, because they're not short tenancies. Did you have any more in your bucket of questions? I think we've exhausted all those that have come in.
I think we have, everything that's come in, we've answered and we've gone over. But again, if you re-watch this when you get sent the link, if you have got any questions, then feel free to reach out to myself or Brendan, and we are more than happy to help and answer anything that we do know. Obviously, the closer we get to this becoming law, the more we will know.
Brilliant. So we've managed to squeeze that into the hour as promised. I hope it's not been too dull or too technical, but you've got something meaningful out of it. And as I say, those of you that want the mould guide that we're putting together, again, we'll try and keep that interesting, but it's really important. The detail around that is really strict, and actually you've got to keep on top of that, particularly this time of year when this comes into the private rental sector. But yeah, our contact details are there. You can WhatsApp, you can email, whatever. And if we've got any other questions coming in now, then we'll pop you an answer across separately. But thank you for your attention. You will all be sent at some point tomorrow a copy of this in case you missed anything and want to pick up on something. But otherwise, do get in touch if you need anything. And thank you for joining us this evening.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Katie. Cheers. Bye for now.